This is murder. When you shoot, the killing of the intentional, deliberate killing of two unarmed men in the ocean clinging to a boat, murder. I don't think we should have any expectation that Pam Bondi's Justice Department will prosecute that. And what that means is that in the short term, at least, accountability will be political. It will come from the political side of the House.
This is the mighty Joyce Vance, who is giving love to Allison Gill, who was just my guest, and Allison Gill was giving love to Joyce Vance. And very excited that I was talking to her about how we can realistically hold Trump, MAGA, and the Trump administration, people like Pete Hegseth and others, accountable for what seems like their numerous crimes and, at the very least, unethical ventures. And Joyce is the perfect person to talk to because Joyce, in addition to being a fancy schmancy law professor, is a former U.S. attorney. At most importantly, though, right now, she is the author of the brand spanking new book, Giving Up is Unforgivable. Now, Joyce, this is where you shamelessly lift up the book and show the people.
Okay, I'm trying to get better at doing this.
I know. I'm helping you because I had to do this also. Giving Up is Unforgivable is a manual for keeping a democracy by Joyce Vance. You have to go purchase it at your very fine bookstore. If possible, please go for an independent bookstore. And please also subscribe to Joyce's fantabulous Substack, Civil Discourse. Now, we can't give up, right? And actually, this is a perfect segue because I was just talking to Allison. And I have said, Joyce, knowing how the industry works, the town, as they call DC, how it's a big club, as George Carlin has said, how so many people have committed, in my opinion, so many crimes and they keep filling up. Oh, I don't know, a Dick Cheney, a George W. Bush, a Richard Nixon. The town protects its own. And oftentimes, despite these egregious violations that we see in real time, a genocide, war crimes, right, lying to the American public, these people fail up. But there are other ways to hold them accountable, if not prison time. I think there is a fever in this country, a righteous rage that is growing, Joyce, where a young generation says, I'm done. I want reformation. I want accountability. I want these institutions to be reformed. And let's just focus on the Pete Hegseth of it all, these Venezuelan strikes that we've been following on the left hook. Let's just use this example when it comes to truth, justice, not giving up, and accountability, because I know you've been writing about this as well. Joyce, I yield the floor to you.
Well, look, I mean, we're clearly at a pivotal moment for this administration. Finally, at long last, we've seen Congress, which has just been slumbering for this entire second Trump presidency, show signs that it might still be alive when there was reporting last Friday, new reporting that indicated that not only had there been a first strike on this ship on September 2nd, which was a very dubious legality, there was a second strike that involved killing two survivors, clinging to the wreckage of the boat, clearly not a threat to the United States. And that's the sort of action that, if we were at war, would be a war crime. Not really anything to debate about that. And Congress apparently didn't think that there was much to debate because Republicans in both houses joined Democrats and said that there had to be a prompt and fulsome investigation. And that hasn't dissipated since last Friday. You know, something that we've seen in the past is maybe somebody shows a little bit of spine. They're summoned to the White House for a conversation, and that seems to melt away overnight. And that really hasn't happened here. If anything, there's an increase. Today, Trump and Pete Hegseth have been under fire, being asked about reporters, what was the timeline like? Who made the decisions? Who was responsible? This issue is not going to go away. But let me just say one more thing, which is, yes, this would be a war crime if we were at war, but we are not at war. And I don't think anyone should expect to see war crimes trials. By the same token, this is murder. When you shoot, the killing of the intentional, deliberate killing of two unarmed men in the ocean clinging to a boat, murder. I don't think we should have any expectation that Pam Bondi's Justice Department will prosecute that. And what that means is that in the short term, at least, accountability will be political. It will come from the political side of the House. And that, I think, is the moment that we're in, waiting to see what that political accountability might look like.
And also, folks, these leaks are coming from inside. I mean, the fact that we have this information, that means people within MAGA, people within the Secretary of Defense, now known as, excuse me, Department of Defense, now known as the Department of War, are leaking this information. And also, what we've seen is from the admissions of Pete Hegseth himself, proudly doubling down, cosplaying, and saying that we did the double tap, the second strike, and now he's pushed back and said, "Oh well, I ordered the admiral to do that." And then as of today, Joyce, I'm sure you've seen as of 3 o'clock, he came out and said, actually, I didn't see survivors in the September boat strike because of, and I'm going to quote him, the fog of war. Your response, Joyce?
As a former prosecutor, when someone's story shifts like that to evolve rapidly to the benefit of the person telling the story, as a prosecutor, you get a little bit suspicious. But what Hegseth is saying here seems to defy common sense, because if he's in fact the targeting decision maker in this case, the idea that he would walk away before things were complete is a little bit mind-boggling. There's been some reporting in the Wall Street Journal that he might have held that role of the TEA in this case. Maybe that's not true, and maybe that wasn't his role, but he's still the Secretary of Defense. This is the very first strike where they're using lethal force, doing what he has called kinetic action. It's very difficult to believe that he would walk away before everything was complete. And this idea that there was a fog of war, I think, is rebutted by the reporting in the Washington Post last Friday, that reporting that said everyone in the room, the commander at Southern Command, was surprised when the smoke cleared from the initial strike, right? Maybe that's the fog of war. And what was left were two people that they saw clinging to the wreckage of the boat in the ocean.
And what Kex has said earlier today in the cabinet meeting, where I'm literally looking at the clip right now, Donald Trump is asleep. I'm going to quote Hegseth, quote, "I watched that first strike live. As you can imagine, at the Department of War, we've got a lot of things to do. So I didn't stick around for the hour to 2 hours, whatever, where all the sensitive site exploitation digitally occurs. I moved on to my next meeting. And then a couple of hours later, I learned about it." Uh, when I hear that, I'm like, Admiral Bradley, probably time to lawyer up, because he's throwing you under the bus.
I mean, this is, exactly why it's so important to have Congress do an investigation. You want to see that happen so that all of the facts around this can emerge. I mean, this is the sort of critical incident where there will be a record of communications before, after, during, a record of who was in the room, a record of what happened. And so it'll be important for Congress to access that information, to see what was happening, and to develop a sort of record that they can use to reality test what the secretary is saying in the Oval Office and to the press today. And of course, to put relevant witnesses under oath and to obtain their sworn testimony.
And isn't this why, Joyce, it goes to the point of what those 8 Democrats who had served said and warned to those who are serving in the military to obey illegal orders? Because I remember, as a student of history, and even though it's not going to be war tribunals because we're not at war, this was, Eichmann said, "I was just following orders. I was just a cog in the wheel. I just did what they told me to do." And he was convicted and executed for war crimes. Industrialists said, "Hey, this was just business as usual." And some of those industrialists who were complicit in the Nazi regime and in war crimes and genocide were convicted and executed. That excuse of "I was just following orders" not being a defense to actual murder.
It's not, because in the military code, there's actually an affirmative burden imposed upon people who are serving in the military not to obey an illegal order. And what that means is that if you receive an order that you have questions about, that you should have questions about, right? It's a subjective standard. The standard asks whether the person who received and followed the order had reason to believe it was illegal. And of course, anyone in the command structure does. And so you're supposed to question it. And that means that you would go to your legal advisor. Of course, Hegseth has disassembled much of the JAG structure that previously gave folks advice, but that's where you go for that sort of advice and you don't obey illegal orders. And in the code, the example, of course, that they give is firing on shipwrecked people who no longer pose a threat to you. So it's a little bit mind-boggling that no one here in this chain of command put a stop to this before
Yeah.
these two men were killed.
And before we move on to some other examples, I just want people to sit with that. We've been talking about this on the left hook for a while. I know you've been talking about it. This is extrajudicial murder. If these people truly didn't pose any threat, I mean, these were, according to their family members, fishermen. We have a Coast Guard, folks.
Well,
They could
and look,
stop.
I mean, can we just not move past the point that
No,
the United States government has been in the business of interdicting drug trafficking for decades? So if you take the administration's explanation at face value, I mean, there's been reporting that some of these people were being trafficked, and it's really unusual in my experience on a boat being used to smuggle drugs and to have so many people on it, 11, which would certainly lend some credibility to the notion that there were people being trafficked, because people who are being trafficked are a valuable commodity worth taking up room on the boat that the smugglers could otherwise put drugs into, as sick and disgusting as that sounds. And so, this whole notion that we didn't just stop the boats, interdict it, sort people out, prosecute the people who were trafficking, that's how this country acts when it's behaving lawfully. And the fact that this is such a sharp departure and that these folks weren't picked up, saved, and prosecuted is really very telling.
That's exactly what I was about to say. You said it better, is that we have a process here of literally stopping the boats. Heather Cox Richardson, who's a boater in Maine, said, blow the motor of the boat if you have to, and then stop the boat, arrest them, detain them, prosecute them. That's what we usually do. Or at the very least, stop them and say, hey, who are you? Where are you going? But the fact that they did this under a cloud of secrecy, where they blew up these people, killed these people, and then afterwards revealed no evidence. To this day, we've been asking, where is the evidence that proves that these are these terrifying drug traffickers? The evidence, folks, if you haven't followed the story, has still not come out. And there are family members now saying, you killed fishermen. And then the two survivors that they actually had, instead of, showing any evidence about these two survivors, what they did was they quickly sent them back to their own country, Joyce. I'm sure you saw that last month.
Yeah.
So in all these strikes, there have only been two survivors, and instead of, I don't know, trying them, if indeed there were, this would be, if they're drug traffickers, hey, this is a great win for the Trump administration. You should, make a public show about it, right, Joyce? Nope, nope, nope. Within a day, they sent them back to their country. So keep your focus on this story, folks. We're talking about the murder, the cold-blooded, deliberate, cruel murder of these folks. And I don't know if you saw Megyn Kelly's commentary, just wishing more and more cruelty, like maiming these people, injuring these people. This type of viciousness, Joyce, there has to be some accountability. And I'm so glad now that even Republicans are joining Democrats and saying, hey, 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 let's have some hearings about this. One quick question about this before I talk to you about Kristi Noem. There's no war tribunals, like you said. But if it is shown that this was murder, how can you hold Hegseth and others accountable?
Well,
Like
I think,
legally?
the political process is the start of it, right? There's already talk that Hegseth will have to resign. Whether that's true or not remains to be seen, but holding hearings, compiling an accurate factual record, letting the Congress weigh in, which of course it should do, particularly the Senate having confirmed him, that's the start of a process here.
Let's start it, folks. And I believe the Democrats. We should ask Democrats to not give this up. Last week, I pay attention, and the DOJ, a news item that kind of got buried, but I've kept it, Joyce, in my back pocket. The DOJ it seems to have thrown Kristi Noem under the bus and said it was actually Kristi Noem who disobeyed Judge Brosberg's order about turning around the plane that had over 230 brown men who were sent to essentially die in an El Salvador prison, which included Kilmar Abrego Garcia. If that is true, Joyce, how can we hold Kristi Noem accountable? And it's very interesting that they named Kristi Noem.
Well, it is. This came in a late night filing DOJ made a week ago tonight. And I think many people were surprised to see that in that pleading, the Justice Department wrote that after the Deputy Attorney General, Todd Blanche, and the then PAYDAG, that's sort of the Deputy Attorney General's lead advisor, Emil Bove, advised the acting general counsel at DHS. So you're getting the sense, right? This is folks talking between the agencies behind the scenes. And then the acting DHS general counsel briefs Secretary Noem. The pleading says that she's the one who gives the order. So it's very, very interesting, that level of detail, and the fact that she gets, I think it was Heather Cox Richardson who referred to that as underbust, set up to be thrown under the bus. Heather may have used that word in a different context, but I find that it's going to be a very provocative word to include in our vocabularies in these next few weeks. So look, the most interesting thing about that, right, is that there's the pleading is silent as to whether or not Noem had conversations with anybody at the White House. And it sure is difficult to believe that she wouldn't have had conversations with folks in the White House before they turned the planes, or before they made the decision not to turn the planes around. Of course, now it'll be up to Judge Boasberg in the first instance to determine whether anyone was in contempt. And he's going about it very methodically, asking for statements from everyone who was involved in that decision, having them weigh in, and then we'll see him proceed from there.
And also, a story that I don't think that we should give up on is that over a week ago, a judge ruled that Trump had illegally deployed the National Guard, not just in DC, but across the country. And, another tragedy, I think about this, had the Trump administration said, all right, we lost, we'll listen to this judge, we're negative double digits on immigration anyway. I'm here in Virginia, DC. Joyce, I can tell these 2,000 National Guard members, now 2,500 because he deployed 500 more. These folks are just, literally, they're just bored. They're just targets walking around. They're picking up trash. And I sit there and I think, Joyce, had they simply complied with this judge and removed these National Guard members, they'd be at home. They'd be spending time with their families. And these two National Guard members that were shot and killed by this Afghan national, who in turn was radicalized, it seems, by his time in the CIA, they'd be alive. I've said two things can be true at the same time, Joyce, that Trump has put these National Guard members in harm's way to, if you will, promote and advance his white nationalist anti-immigration strategy. And for Stephen Miller, according to the Wall Street Journal, in the summer, he deliberately unleashed these ICE agents at Home Depot for provocation. And at the same time, you can and should condemn the tragic murder. You can hold both things at the same time to be true, that these National Guard members should be alive right now, and they should not have been deployed. But can you talk to us about this order that this judge gave, this ruling, that said that the deployment is completely illegal?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I mean, the crime is utterly horrific. There's no justification for this sort of premeditated murder. I think that that's important to say. My heart breaks for the victims and for their families and for the Guard unit that's going through this senseless tragedy. On the other hand, something we don't do in this country is hold entire populations or parts of populations accountable for the acts of one individual. We don't know what the shooter's motive was yet. We don't know why he made the decision that he would, execute this crime. I'm always a fan of waiting to know what the facts are before rushing to judgment on an issue. But that said, the case that you're asking about, the case involving the deployment of the National Guard in D.C., federalizing them and deploying them, bringing in Guard units from other places like West Virginia, the judge had put that on hold. She had concerns that the order was overbroad and in place for too long. But she stayed her order until the middle of December to give the government time to take an appeal. And that's not unusual. That's a very standard sort of proceeding that a judge uses to give the government the opportunity to appeal an order, which they undoubtedly will do in this case. the way the timeline plays out, of course, is extraordinarily tragic here. I think it's interesting that this DC case is in progress, headed towards the Court of Appeals. There's also the Chicago case, which is already sitting in front of the Supreme Court. The case from Portland, I may be missing one more. But this issue of whether or not Donald Trump can use the National Guard, can federalize them for domestic law enforcement in the way that he's trying to do, and that's really contrary to the history and tradition of how the military is deployed domestically in this country. This issue is going to be decided by the Supreme Court, and most likely this term.
And he's also negative double digits on this, folks. So you would think maybe if he wants to, climb out of the sinking approval ratings where he's at 36%, he just see. I have kids everywhere, so I hope you don't mind, Joyce. Like 800 kids. But based upon, real quick, I will say, there's one Afghan national shooting suspect. As Joyce said, we still have no idea why he shot and killed these two poor National Guard members. But that hasn't stopped this Trump administration the past week to be full-on white supremacist with language like remigrate, posted on the DHS Twitter account. I'm not making this up, folks. Using words like American sovereignty, talking about sending us back, people who look like me, to third world countries, where Donald Trump today said, I don't want the Somalis here, I want them out. And Kristi Noem yesterday said that she wants a full travel ban on every damn country that's been flooding our nation with killers, leeches, and entitlement junkies. I'm not making this up. Full, hateful, nativist, Islamophobic, anti-immigrant policies being unleashed in the aftermath of this one tragedy done by one Afghan national, and also throwing all these Afghans under the bus and pausing the immigration of Afghans, many of them who helped U.S. soldiers and veterans fight the Taliban and helped as translators and as allies. But I digress. Before I let you go, real quick.
You don't. I mean, can I just underscore the point you're making? Because I think it's a critically important one. The notion that we're going to break promises to people who served alongside military and CIA units in the fight against the Taliban and who did dangerous work that would have put American troops and American personnel at risk had they not been willing to partner with us. For one thing, we owe them a debt of gratitude. It's a moral debt to repay that. At the same time, it's in our self-interest to take care of these people because the United States will need foreign allies in future situations. And who will cooperate with us when this is our legacy, when this is how we treat people? So doing this, it's not a matter of partisan politics. And I know that, Trump, as he so often does, is using this to fulfill his pre-existing desire to appear to be tough on immigration and even to revoke naturalized citizenship for people. This hurts the United States. This hurts our interests. This will hurt our children. And that's a conversation we should all be having with our senators, demanding that they put pressure on the White House to undo this ridiculous track that we're on.
No, amen. I really appreciate you saying that. And I had Haris Tareen, who is an Afghan American who came here as a refugee, who's a leader, a Muslim American leader, who also served in the DHS and was in part responsible for bringing over 200,000 Afghans here in 2021 when he was at DHS. And go check out that conversation so you all really understand the true history of Afghans and Afghan refugees and what they've gone through and how they've helped Americans, and using that one tragedy, that one national, to go against Afghans, Somalis, immigrants, Muslims. It's not how we should be as a country. It is indecent. It is inhumane. And as Joyce said, the rest of the world is watching. And if we are throwing our allies under the bus, why, oh, why, Joyce, would anyone help us or believe us in the future when we need their assistance in foreign countries and foreign operations? They won't. Joyce, I wanted to ask you another question, but I'm mindful of your time, so I'm going to let you go. But before I let you go, you have to shamelessly promote your book. You have to hold up your book again and tell everyone why they have to buy the book, Giving Up is Unforgivable.
Thanks for making me do that. You can tell this doesn't come naturally. This is my book. I really do hope that you'll read it. It should be available in your local libraries. I taped the Audible version myself, which was a lot of fun. And of course, it's available at your local bookstores and also at the big box stores. Look, here's why I hope that you'll read my book. I think that we're making progress. I think that Americans are beginning to understand that protests matter, that if we're persistent with our elected officials, we can, in effect, become the guardrails that had fallen apart in this democracy. We had incredible gains in an off-year election. Even Republicans were being disloyal to Trump over the Epstein affair. And now we're watching this reaction that has reawakened, a branch of government that had taken itself off of the playing field, Congress, which is now beginning to fulfill its constitutional duty of oversight and of checking the executive branch when it becomes swollen with power. So my book is a little bit nerdy, but it's also, I think, a fairly accessible romp through our history, through some American cases, some Supreme Court cases, and it tells the story of why we shouldn't give up and why we can succeed if we all work together.
We love nerds. We're all nerds here. We need nerds. And folks, accountability. Demand more from your elected officials. Demand more for those running for office. Even if accountability, as Joyce said, might not come in the form of prosecutions, even if it doesn't come with jail sentences. Accountability can come at the ballot box. Accountability can come with oversight and hearings. Accountability can come through truth and facts. Accountability can come with us promoting a narrative of inclusion and kindness and humanity and decency. Right. And we not only have earned this and deserve this, but our future generation, I say this as a father of 3 kids, deserve to live in a country where good people are rewarded and the people who benefit off of misery and cruelty and greed are in at least one way shamed and at least one way seen as the villains of our children's history books. That's what I believe. And if I may, Joyce, as I let you go, as those who know, Left Hook is independent. I'm a terrible capitalist. Everything is without paywall. I've never done any pitch decks or anything, but Ground News has come on as a partner. Ground News also supports IHIP, Zateo, Mehdi Hassan, Qasim Rashid, Jess Craven. And for those who know, Ground News came on and said, hey, this is our product. They are what I call an aggregator. So they're a one-stop shop of world news. But what they also do, and why I actually decided to bring them on as a partner, is they also audit. So every single news story, they tell you how factual the news source is, whether they lean left or right, and then who owns it. So I call them an auditor and an aggregator. And they also have this great thing called Blind Spot, which tells you literally what the right wing is looking at and what everyone else is looking at. And Joyce, it's wild. It's run by a woman. It's independent. It's subscriber based, and they have offered all the viewers of Civil Discourse and the Left Hook a 40% off discount. I don't get any money off of this, so I'm sharing the link. It's groundnews.com/hook. I just shared it. Go there, try it out. 40% off if it works. And lastly, I will say, since I'm such a terrible capitalist, Joyce, I'm doing the anti-capitalist terrible Black Friday sale where everything is free on the Left Hook, but I depend on the kindness of strangers. If you're a paid subscriber, thank you. If you're not, I'm doing 25% off, which means $38 a year, $350 a month to join the Left Hook. But if you have some money, first go buy Joyce's book. Joyce's book, again, is Giving Up is Unforgivable. Joyce, show the book. I know it's gross. You got to do it. I'm teaching you what I was taught. There you go. And then if you have some money left over, come by, just give a few bucks. But if not, everything's free. Folks, be kind, rest. It's going to be a long walk. Be informed. Do not give up. Do not choose cynicism. Do not choose apathy. There's more of us than there are of them. I think MAGA and Trump are finally cracking. We're seeing it. They're finally cracking. And it's up to us to reform and create a better future for our kids. Buy Joyce's book. Subscribe to the Civil Discourse. Be kind. And please, oh, please don't be a fascist. Joyce, hopefully you can come back. I get Joyce every 3 months. So maybe if I do the math, that's December, January, maybe February, she'll be kind enough to come back.
It'll be fun to see what's going on then, don't you think?
I hope so. I think things might get worse, but I think you're going to see a growing multicultural coalition of the willing. So I think it'll be fun.
Talking about the elections by February, that's for sure.
Yeah, and for the folks in Tennessee, last thing I'll say, Tennessee, we're recording this. If you're in line, stay in line. Stay in line, get in line, and if you're in line by 7 p.m., they have to take your vote. Massive special election. It's a plus 22 Trump district. There's a reason they're freaked out because Afton Ben, even if she loses and comes within striking distance, Joyce, I think that's huge.
Look, the fact that she's still in the race in Tennessee, my neighbor state, speaks volumes because, as you say, this district was plus 22. You know, the polls last week showed her opponent up any place from 2 to 8%. That's a moral victory. It would be fabulous if this turned out to be an actual victory, and she ends up in Tennessee as a representative. Tennessee has no statewide elected Democrats. Having a member in Congress would be a tremendous boost to the spirits of folks in Tennessee. So if you know people there, if you have friends there, pick up the phone and call them and make sure that they voted today.
Yeah, please. And she's running on affordability. She's a very likable candidate. And again, if you don't follow Tennessee politics, Southern politics, the fact that she's even within striking distance in what was a ruby red plus 22 Trump district, my friends, that means the tide is turning. Thank you, Joyce. Buy her book. For the 3,000 people who joined us late, this will be up later on my Substack and Joyce's Substack. Joyce, take care of yourself. Thanks so much for making time.
Good to see you. Have a good night.
Bye, everyone.